So I'm just going to kick off. So welcome everyone. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Veronica and I'm marketing manager at Marosa. Just before we start, I would like to remind you of our housekeeping rules. That means that this session will be recorded and shared with you after the webinar, including the presentation slides. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function or chat and we will address them at our dedicated slide. Rufina, if you change the slide, people can actually see the housekeeping rules that I'm talking about. So in today's webinar, we will cover key aspects of two important obligations in Spain. We're going to talk about Verifactu and e-invoicing. I would like to highlight that this session will be focused on the technical and regulatory aspects of both obligations, including the scope, reporting models, and relevant timelines. And to deliver this webinar today with us is our new head of e-invoicing and public policy, Rufina de la Rosa. Rufina has over 24 years of experience in the Spanish tax administration, where he served as a tax inspector. He designed and implemented the SII and led the modernization of their information services. He also implemented an app for submitting income tax returns and promoted the first AI project among European tax administration. But let's dive into our webinar. Rufina, it's your time to shine.
Thank you, Veronica, for your presentation, and thank you for everyone for attending this webinar. The first thing perhaps is to show where we are in Spain and where we are going in this invoice and real-time reporting environment, we can say. From the beginning, we started in Spain, and I think it was one of the earliest projects in real-time reporting in Europe with SII. We started with it in 2017, and there are no any changes, still a small or a regional change in the Basque country, in the Basque provinces of Álava, Guipúzcoa, and Vizcaya, that you can see on the screen, that started from 2022 to 2024. I'm not to explain this ticket buy initiative because it's very similar to Verifactu and is only focused in these three provinces. What we have ahead, we have two very important projects. One is Verifactu and the other one is the mandatory e-invoice. And both of them have some uncertainties in their timelines. Verifactu implies two kinds of obligations. One obligations from developer of the softwares that have a timeline that started when the ministerial order is going to be passed, and they have 9 months to adapt their system. And for all companies, we have a fixed date. That fixed date is the July of 2025. So just in 1 year's time from now. What's the uncertainty? That this ministerial order with the technical guidance hasn't been passed. So the tax administration is thinking about implementing a small delay or perhaps making it not mandatory at the beginning or not imposing penalties at the beginning. But what we have to have in mind that that's 1st of July 2025 is what now the legislation establishes. So really would have 1 year of time to be prepared to this new obligation that we'll explain later. The second initiative that started more or less at the same moment and affect more or less the same obligations. We'll try to explain the difference between Verifactu and mandatory invoice after. And this own initiative has also some very uncertain timelines. What the legislation establishes, what is it was created by the Crea and Crece law, the Grow create and growth law, that is quite famous nowadays, establishes two deadlines. One in 1 year's time for biggest companies, those above 80 million euros, and 1 year more for the smaller companies. But when this timeline starts, after the regulatory has been passed, and this situation nowadays is that regulatory hasn't been passed. So at the beginning, we were thinking about mid-2025 for biggest companies, mid-2026 for smaller one, but probably the best scenario nowadays is at the beginning of 2026. That implies that probably 2026 we are going to have a lot of e-invoices around Europe, from France, from Germany, and of course from Spain. And all above that, we have, as you're sure now, the VIDA directive, the VAT in the Digital Age directive, that initially they established 2028 like the timeline to establish mandatory invoice around Europe. That deadline was moved in the last draft to 2030, but probably like VIDA hasn't been approved by the Belgian presidents in the EU, and now it's under the Hungarian presidency. Probably we are going to see that this 2030 will have a delay also on this deadline. What will happen? What will happen is that all the national initiatives will go ahead, and what we will not have is this harmonization that EU wanted to achieve. But all the biggest countries have. Italy has its own e-invoice now. Spain, France, and Germany are moving forward. Romania, Poland, Portugal, Hungary. So countries are not waiting to the European Union, and we'll see probably the extension of e-invoicing around Europe. I don't know if before the VIDA directive is going to be passed. Going into Verifactu, Verifactu is the first initiative that we are going to implement in Spain. The company must implement in Spain. So let's know about what implies this initiative. Verifactu establishes new requirements for the computing billing system. And you must know what the legislation defines like a computing billing system is. That's set of software and hardware that are able to introduce billing information, to storage it, and to process it. Why I want to stop in this definition? Because it doesn't forbid that any manual invoicing can be applied. If there is a very small company that nowadays still hand write their invoices, or use a Word to write the invoice, they are allowed to go ahead with it. And perhaps if they are using an Excel and Excel's format only to create the invoice, but not to process and to storage it, they can still do it. But like most of the company, of course, the majority of the people that is attending this webinar, you can't work in a modern company with manual system of invoicing. So for the rest of company, they are going to be under the scope of the Verifactu. But what companies are included or excluded? The first thing is that it's only it applies only to companies established in Spain. But we have to be aware that these establishment rules are not under the VAT legislation, but under the direct taxation rules, corporate taxation, or individual income taxation. So it's a big difference from the common VAT rules that we are used to. And the more important exclusion are that companies under SIA are out of the scope of Verifactu. Why? Because if a company is under SIA, they are sending a lot of information with a high quality and with a very, very high frequency for this, as you know, to the Spanish tax administration. So this is quite a good taxpayer for us, and they don't need to introduce any new obligations for these companies. But what happens with auto-billing, with self-billing? Self-billing, as you know, is an obligation when a company is selling. We can say perhaps a meal producer is selling their products to a big supermarket chains. It's very usual that this supermarket chain reach an agreement to self-billing the invoices that the farmer must issue. Verifactu focus on the obligations in this example of the farmer, regarding if the invoice at the end is issued by the supermarket chain. So it's quite a problem for companies under the SIA, because they can be out except from the self-billing operation. But the Spanish tax administration is rethinking this obligation, because if you can trust SIA companies, because the quality of this company or the information provided by these companies is quite good, is with a high quality, so why do you impose a new obligation for them? So they are thinking perhaps to eliminate this obligation of auto-billing. But again, like we were talking with timelines, is something that is not still in the legislation we have so far. So it's something that we have to follow the news, and of course, if any changes is produced in the legislation, we very quickly share it with all of you. And from a regional point of view, it's not applied Verifactu in the Basque Country and Navarra, as we have told before. They have their own obligations, the ticket by obligations, but it is applicable to Canary Islands, Ceuta, and Melilla. There are also some exclusions when no invoice is required, or when you are in a simplified VAT regimes. And sometimes there is very technical difficulties or very commercial difficulties. You can ask to the tax authorities to accept you from the Verifactu obligation, but we know that this exception will be very rigid, and in very few occasions the Spanish tax authority will grant an exception to Verifactu. There is the possibility, but in a very, very limited number of situations. What Verifactu implies? As I said before, two kinds of regulation, one for software developers and one for companies themselves. Software developers, we have to think not only in the real IT companies, but also if any companies change or produce themselves their billing system, they can be also under these obligations, except you are an SII company that you are going to be out. What Verifactu implies for software developers, what the Spanish tax authorities wanted to eliminate the possibility for a company to delay an invoice, to change it, to use double accounting of the invoices. So the software must guarantee, as you can see on the screen, the integrity, conservation, accessibility, legibility, tracking, and inalterability of any billing records. There's also an important, how do you guarantee the tracking? That's a very important thing, because you are you build up a chain between the invoices. You must include fingerprints, a hash of security in an invoice that has information of the previous one, like we can see on the screen. The system that follows Verifactu is very similar to SII. The companies must build up a record of the invoices, of the information contained in the invoices, at the same time or previously to the issuing of the invoice. And this record is very similar to the SII, with the same information that SII contains, but with some more information, the information that you can see in the square on the right side on the screen. There is something, it's another point that's very important to underline, is that you can issue summary invoices. You know that in SII you can send a summary invoice of all the simplified invoices issued per day, but you can't do that on Verifactu. You must record each of the invoices. So that's a very important difference between SII and Verifactu. Another aspect is, yeah, you must print a QR code on the invoices, because through the QR code, companies, clients can validate information of the invoice, or can send the information to the tax authority, as we can explain a bit longer later. So these are the obligations for software developers. Have in mind that if you buy a software of a billing system and you alter it, to change it, or you are under this obligation. If you create your own billing system, you will fall under this obligation. But most of the situation, that is Marosa obligations. We have to follow these rules, and our clients will be granted that Marosa is following, of course, the obligation, that the requirement that this legislation establishes. So for companies, there are two options. Verifactu itself, that is an optional system, and non-Verifactu. Why we do have two options? Because the first idea of the tax authority was have only Verifactu, because Verifactu implies to send in a real-time basis the information to the tax authority. That's the better option for tax authority, have all the information in real time. But the legislation they passed doesn't allow that obligation. So they have to create the non-Verifactu model and try to make more attractive the Verifactu system. And so in this situation, you can find difference between the two models that I'll try to explain now. Verifactu, as I said, is optional. It implies send the information of the invoices in a real-time basis. And when you send the information to the tax authorities, you must print the invoices with a QR code in it, and of course with the fingerprints the security has on them. What allows the QR code? The QR code enables the recipient, the client, to verify that the invoice is correct. You can access to the Hispanic Tax Authority website, and you can check that that invoice is correct, as it has been declared on to the tax authorities. So that gives you more transparent, it's a more transparent situation for you, and of course you have a better qualification for the tax authorities. And that also allows you to access to all the array of helping services that the tax authorities will implement, from pre-populating pre-filled declarations to any other helping services they can create. If you are in the non-Verifactu situation, you are not sending in real-time reporting that information, that you must storage it. You must record it, and you must keep it. You must keep it during 4 years' time, the statutory time in Spain, and you must guarantee that information has a high quality, so the tax authority can trust that you haven't altered it, you haven't changed it. Why can you do that? Because they are putting more obligations on you. You must you must sign electronically every record of the invoices. You must keep during 4 years all the records. You must keep a register and events log or any interruptions of the billing process. If there is a power supply problem, a Wi-Fi that hasn't worked properly, also an actualization of the software, you must log it and keep logging all of those incidents. And after you have stored the information, the tax authority can request that information online, but only when a tax audit has started. I have, you can see a very schematic ways of how the models, or how the two models operates, the Verifactu and the non-Verifactu. As you see on the left side of the screen on the slide, in Verifactu, the supplier sends the XML information to the tax authority at the same time or previously to issuing the invoice to the customer with a QR code on it. In the non-Verifactu, you have like an offline SII or SII in two steps. You are storing like in Verifactu, you are sending the invoice to the supplier with the QR code, creating the XML, and you must record that information. And when the Spanish tax authority requests it, you must send that information, that XML, to the Spanish tax authorities. So these are the two obligations that we must have in mind in 1 year's time. So what are the next steps we have to think about, or what decisions we have to take? The first thing, are we under the SIA scope? If we are under SIA, we are not obliged by Verifactu, except, as I said before, in the self-billing situations, if it doesn't change in the legislation. Probably it will change, but so far, the only obligation for SIA is for self-billing, auto-billing obligations. But if we are out of the SIA, probably we can decide to opt-it. SIA is mandatory for companies over 6 million euros of sales, but it's voluntary for the smaller companies. Perhaps you can decide to opt to SII because we know the software, we have implementing most companies, you can trust in Marosa or in any other company. So perhaps you can decide, and there is the difference about summary records that is also you have to think about it. So we can decide to go into SII or to keep it out of it. If we are out of it, we must decide if we are going, which of the two models we are going to follow, the Verifactu itself or the non-Verifactu. For a very, very personal opinion, from Rufino de la Rosa opinion and non even Marosa opinion, the obligations that you have to follow in both systems are very similar. And in non-Verifactu, you have more responsibilities of recording logs or recording of keeping the information, and you have a worse public image, not only before the tax authorities, but also before your clients. So from my personal opinion, and it depends also, of course, of the quality of your systems, of your information, and everything. But perhaps if you have to do that, it's better to go ahead into Verifactu and not keep the second in the second situation. So what are you doing? How are you going to implement Verifactu? You have to opt for a billing software. There are a lot of options. You can decide to have an external system that you are going to send information to Marosa or any other provider. Marosa will print your, or will be able to print the QR code on your invoices, send them to your clients, or send them back to your company if you prefer to send to your clients, and send the XML information to the tax authority. It can be also an internal system with an API solution, or perhaps integrated it completely with your software or creating a new software. The three options, any of the three options, Marosa can help you to implement them. And of course, when that's going back to our first slide, we have only a fixed deadline, is July the 1st of 2025, in one year's time, less a week or less 4 days. But it's true, it's under the review, because that technical guidance that is going to be contained in the ministerial order is still pending. So probably we are going to see some delay or some two-phase implementation, and voluntary one till the end of 2025, and a mandatory one after in 2026. So we have seen that now in Spain we have SII, that in some regions they have a specific ticket buy in the Basque Country, and we have in 1 year's time Verifactu. But that's not all. We have more obligations in the near future. Is the e-invoicing that Clear law has implemented. What we must have in mind is that the law was passed and the obligation has been created. It's true that there are some regulations pending, especially the regulation that start all the timelines, but the obligation has been created by law, so it's something that we can see that is going to be delayed. And we are still waiting, as I said previously, for the regulation and the ministerial order with the technical specification, the guidance. To what operations will be, which operations are under the invoices? All B2B operations. All B2B operations will follow under this invoicing. Why? Because the reason that is going to achieve or wants to achieve the Ministry of Economy is to reduce the late payment between companies. So they need information of all the invoices and all the payment between companies. And which operations? All of them when the recipient of the invoice is established in Spain. So exports are out of the scope, or operations through sellings from Spain to Europe are also out of the scope. And when, that's the first uncertainty of this project, We have talked about the once or 2 years time, and there is another issue that is now in discussion between the Spanish tax administration as the Ministry of Economy. The Ministry of Economy is the promoter of this initiative, because that's 1 year time the law establishes starts after the regulation. But now from the Spanish Tax Authority wants to wait also to the technical guidance. And that is something that is under, I have to say, big discussion between these two ministerial bodies, these two administrative bodies. So like in self-billing, like in Verifactu, you have to stay tuned. Sorry for this joke, and any change, any new news on this situation, we'll share with all of you. So one small review of invoicing. Invoicing in Spain is built in a 5 corners model, sharing a public platform of invoicing with private platform that can operate also. How can you operate with public and private platform? Using different syntaxes. And in the Spanish regulation, they will allow for syntax, as you can see on the screen, XML, UBL, Edifact, or Facturai, the own or the specific Spanish syntax. For the public platform, only Facturai will be used. For them, perhaps for us also, for the software developers as Marosa, they use only one syntax, and that implies that they don't need to make amendments or make changes between one syntax and one other. In the public platform, they will keep information of all of the invoices. Those that has been exchanged through the public platform, but also copy of all the information of all the invoices that have been exchanged through the private platform. And they need also information about the payment. Take in mind that the late payments, reduced late payments, is the main target of this legislation. And very important also, they are not going to do any clearance on the invoices. They are going to check only that the syntax is correct, and that the identification of the taxpayers are correct, but not any other checking on the invoices like SII, that in SII will keep that clearance system. They will also support status information of the invoices. You must always send information of the acceptance and the date of the invoice, and also the payment when invoice is totally paid, and when the date of the payment. There are some voluntary status allowed, and there is a very important thing also, that in public platform all the invoices are understood as accepted, except that specifically has been rejected by the recipient of the issuer. And the notification of the changes in the status is 4 days, as you can see on the screen. There are also some characteristics, perhaps something that is a bit annoying, that you need to sign electronically the invoices. Sometimes something that is not shared by a lot of companies. Perhaps if you have the information on the web in the Spanish tax administration, you don't really need to be signed. But okay, and there is also requirement about security and quality of the platform, and any invoices can be identified by a unique code, because if you need to match any invoice with any payment, you need to identify individually any invoice, and that will be with the issuer tie-in, the number and series of the invoice, and the date of dispatch, the same as in SII. But it's true that it's going to be important, very demanding. What is going to be very demanding is the information of the payment. It's something that we are perhaps less used to it. We are very used to send information on the invoice, to download the invoice from another platform. But we have to take in mind this new obligation. After download the invoice, you have to also give information, provide information about the payment. And to end my presentation and to give space to make any question that you want to provide us, I have also drawn some schematic models as we see how the Spanish invoicing system will operate. There are 3 models. Perhaps you can draw somewhat more, but I think these 3 models explain quite well how we see the invoice system in Spain will operate. The first model that I think the more, perhaps the smaller companies or less companies will less need to share a lot of information will use is through the public platform. You don't need to buy any services from a private platform, and you, for a supplier, send the invoice to the public platform. The customer must download the information of the invoices from it, and when the payment is made, they must send the information to the public platform. A very, very simple one, and with all the information in the public platform. Second model is perhaps the right or the original 5 cores model. Both the supplier and the customer are using a private platform. The private supplier sends the invoice to the private platform to the customer's private platform that it can download information from it. In this model, the Spanish tax authority needs the information, so the private platform must send a copy of the invoice to the Agencia Tributaria, and the payment and the date of the payment must also send to the public platform. And the third model that I think is going to be very used, because you don't need change a syntax to another one. You don't need those requirements. You are using the public platform. The Spanish Tax Authority to communicate the private platforms. You are using your private platforms, send the information to the Spanish Tax Authority, the Spanish Tax Authority to the other platform, and the customer at the end, and sending back the information on the payment. We will see these 3 models in the future, and perhaps probably the model 3 is going to be very used, because you are relying on the factorized syntax and you do not need to change it. So we have a very big demanding future very close to us. We are moving to the SII to Verifactu in 1 year's time, and we are moving to the e-invoices Spanish system in a close future too. It's true, and the Spanish tax authority has publicly told that the coexistence of SII and e-invoicing is quite demanding, and probably they are going to see some coherence or some compatibility among them, but that is going to be very, very, very in a very long period of time. So we in 2026, and we have to see in Spain three different models of real-time reporting or invoicing, what implies a lot of effort for companies. And at the moment, any question you want to share with us, I will be very happy to answer it. And if we can answer it on this webinar, we will be very happy to write back on email.